Hi, everybody, and welcome. We are so glad to be with you today for our discussion about commonly asked video questions. My name is Judith Silverman Hodara. I'm a founder and principal at Fortuna Admissions, and delighted to be with two very dear friends today. Brittany Michal, who is ex-Wharton, ex-Princeton, and ex-Hopkins, who is also one of our stellar Fortuna coaches, who's going to be answering some questions for us today, as well as Sharon Joyce, who is ex-Berkeley, in addition to being a wonderful Fortuna coach and a career coach extraordinaire. Well, we had such a great time with you guys last week. We thought that we would come back this week and do a little bit more conversation around video questions. Abhijit is going to put up some files for us to look at. And we are really grateful, again, for our terrific partnership with the GMAT Club. We've been working with them for a number of years. They are just a wonderful partner, great content, great production. And we're really glad to be able to partner with them and to reach out to our friends through the GMAT Club today. So again, Brittany Michal is with me, and Dr. Sharon Joyce and Dr. Brittany Michal, both of them. And just delighted to spend some time with you today. A little bit about Fortuna, which we can talk about on the next slide, is that we are really dedicated to helping you all figure out this process. We have about 40 former gatekeepers, which is hard to believe, to the world's top business schools. And you can see our list of schools represented. We are located all over the world. We are very much a virtual group of individuals. And we are more than happy to speak with you about your interest in applying to business school and how we can help to support your journey. So if you'd like a free consultation, you can sign up on www.fortunaadmissions.com. Also, just so you know, we will be sharing a deck with you today, but also encourage you to post any questions and comments in the comments section of your screen, and we will be more than happy to answer those as we go through. So without further ado, we'd like to jump on and kind of get straight to our discussion topics. So some of these questions are not going to be such a surprise for you. And what we're going to do is sort of go back and forth and ask our panelists about how they might suggest that you think about preparing, how you think about answering these questions. And again, friends, feel free to jump in. This is really a conversation. It's not a lecture. So would love both Brittany and Sharon to kind of share their insights as we kind of go through some of the questions that our students are going to be asked. So Britt, I'm going to start with you. A very common video question is, why an MBA? And what kind of things do you think should be answered in that question?
Thanks, Judith. I'm happy to be here today and jump into some of these. So why MBA is one that everyone should know pretty well by the time they get to the process of doing an interview or doing a video interview. So this one's really kind of a layup. So in your MBA research, you should really be cultivating a very clear response to why you need an MBA. And so when you're answering this type of question, you might even be, heavily relying back on, to your essays, what you've written in your essays, and really, helping the admissions committee understand sort of your trajectory to the MBA. So not only why you need it, what the gaps are in your skill sets, but sort of where you hope to go, which kind of lends itself to some of the follow-up questions that come after, sort of surrounding your career goals.
So Sharon, this is pretty much a general question, right? Why an MBA? It's not supposed to be very specific.
Right. And usually it's about one of the first questions that you'll be asked. It's a great kind of softball or warm-up question. And just to kind of dovetail on what Brittany just said, it should be expected, right? I mean, I think part of leading up to applying is just having this iterative process of what really is guiding my intention to apply to an MBA program. And again, I think it's all about being able to recognize what you want to get out of the program, and then thinking too, and being self-reflective about some of the areas that are gaps for you, and how the MBA is really going to help you connect a bunch of dots in terms of what you've had in your previous experience leading up to this point in time where you're really excited to go back to graduate school.
So Sharon, I'm going to kind of keep with you for a minute because you do so much work around career envisioning and career preparedness. So how does this question, the next question that we're talking about, why do you want to attend our MBA program, and what are your short-term goals? Can you sort of talk about how you might approach that question?
I think that it's really important. I know when I work with clients and we prep for this, I think sometimes they get a little flustered.
Mhm,
Like it
mhm.
seems like it's going to be really daunting when I say, you have this. We've been talking about this for months, right? And so I think before you even go into doing the actual video, like have some bullet points ready
Mhm, mhm,
to
mhm.
address these topics so that you can stay on point. It's sometimes really easy to get flustered once the camera countdown starts. So have your thoughts collected. And you really should know this, right? As we've mentioned. So think about some of the things that you want to share with that school that really demonstrates your research and your knowledge outside of just doing a rudimentary web search. I'll find sometimes clients completely forget about mentioning something like, wow, I learned a lot on this webinar, or I had the opportunity to speak one-on-one with the president of the consulting club. So make sure you're bringing in some of these different pieces that really show that you've thought about why this particular school is going to be a great fit for your professional goals, as well as some of the interpersonal things that you want to develop while you're at their program. I always say it's kind of like dating, right? You know, you're kind of dating a couple different schools in this process, and they want to know that they're special to you.
That's
So think
fair.
about sharing some of those pieces that you've had the opportunity to research. In terms of short-term goals, though, too, again, getting kind of beyond the rudimentary web research, think about with your short-term goals. Can you talk about, gee, you know, I'd really love to do a summer internship with Amazon,
Mhm, mhm.
particularly if you know that Amazon is an active recruiter at that school. I think that, again, it shows that your placement makes sense and that you really are being focused and targeted on what appeals to you about that school, how you will be able to be a fit in terms of what you're looking for in your career. And I think it's also, though, important to not just talk about the curricular pieces, but talk a little bit too about sort of these fit pieces, more of the personal side as well. For example, if you would really like to take an active role in their women in leadership group, you know, say something about that as well. I kind of talk about the 3 C's, right? So making sure that you discuss something about the curriculum, something about the co-curricular, and then finally something about the community. So that
Mhm.
could mean the vibe of the place, but it could also mean its location. For someone who's interested in technology, maybe talking about the proximity to Silicon Valley and how that really appeals to you and makes sense given what you want to do in the short term.
So short term for you, can you kind of give a definition of in your mind that's internship and then immediately after
Internship
graduation?
immediately after, and some schools will be very, very targeted about that. They want to know what is sort of your plan for the next 3 to 5 years,
Mhm,
and it
mhm.
really is important to stay focused on the question that is being asked. I think sometimes, you know, there might be, it makes sense or there's a logical way to talk about the long-term goals, but for that specific question, they do want you to stay more targeted around the short-term goals, thinking about what you want to do during those 3 to 5 years in terms of what kind of skills are you still going to be developing. And again, the type of company that you want to be in to help develop those skills. And again, if that company is an active recruiter at
Sure.
that particular school, I think that's the way to really kind of position yourself for responding to this question.
So, Britt, I'm going to ask you about the follow-up question, which is, why do you want to attend our MBA program, and what are your long-term goals? And sometimes I'll get students asking me, like, what does long-term mean? Does long-term mean like 5 years, 10 years? What if I want to
Yeah.
do something in politics, which is totally unrelated to the job I'm going to have when I graduate? So, can you talk about how to best answer that question?
Yeah, so usually, you know, in my work with clients, they come to me with kind of two different versions of their long-term goals. And I think depending on what your sort of career narrative is, what your story is, and also even where you're applying, it can really take one of two forms. And so the first would be like a more traditional, concrete long-term goal. So exactly like the short-term goal, Like Sharon said, you might mention, longer term, I see myself going from this place, to this very specific place, a specific organization, a specific role. And you can tie it very closely to, the concrete elements of what you need to get out of the program.
Right.
I think there's also another version of long-term goal, which can be more of the vision for your career. So sometimes applicants, and I think this is kind of being like just genuine and authentic too, they know really concretely where their short term might take them, but the long term is a little bit more open-ended. And so some applicants might speak more to a greater vision that they have for their career, the type of work they want to do, maybe the vertical, the industry they want to be in, but they don't know specifically the company, or even just the type of impact that they want to have in their career. So I think depending on the school and the narrative that you've really set for yourself in your other application materials, you've got kind of both paths you can potentially take for that long-term question.
Well, thank you both. That's a terrific answer. And it's a question that these video questions are obviously very prevalent. And we talk to students all the time. They're like, I don't really know, they have a hard time with the cutoff in terms of short-term, long-term. So this is super helpful. We're going to go on to the next slide and look at a couple of additional questions that are being asked. So Sharon, do you want to jump in and sort of talk about how to think about this question? What type of teams do you typically work in, and what role do you play? Oh, Sharon, we can't hear you all of a sudden. That's okay.
For this question, I think they want to dig in a little bit more deeply about how do you see yourself in your organization? Do you have some self-awareness to really think about what are your contributions? And I think some of these types of questions also are kind of like, what are your strengths 101? So thinking about, are you a connector? Do you help bring different sides of the house together? If you're straddling maybe engineering and sales. So just really thinking about what is the value that you bring. I think though too, sometimes there's sort of this undercurrent that is really useful to make that connection though. So if you think about some of the strengths that you bring onto a team, a great way to kind of conclude responding to this question is how will you then bring it into the MBA program, and how will you be a valued player when you are on different team projects and group projects?
Just sort of thinking about that, and how do you, are they looking for examples of what kind of role you play, or is this more sort of a descriptor, like I am the mediator, or I am the,
I think it can be both. I mean, I think that, a lot of what we often say with Fortuna is, show, don't just tell. So if you can come in with a story about something like, while recently on this project, even though my title is X, I find myself often in the role of doing Y. And I think that appeals to me because it gives me an opportunity to use my analytical skills or use some of my skills in problem solving. So I think it's a little bit of both, Judith.
Mm-hmm. So, and Brittany, would you agree, if you're sort of thinking about what would you bring to the class and community at our program? They're looking for like examples that they can share.
Yeah, I mean, I think that just to aid in sort of believability and storytelling, like, you want to give an example if you could give an example. Sometimes with video questions, though, you're sort of crammed for time, though, and space. So it's often a challenge. And this is why pre-planning for these things is so important. Like with everything that you're going to do for your MBA applications, is really thinking through the stories that will work and the stories that will fit, and how you can kind of present them really clearly and concisely. But I'm a big fan of the needing to balance the tell with the show. So anytime that you can use an example, it can be beneficial to do so.
So it could be something like, I really love trying out new road trips, and so have have gone across the United States with a backpack with, like, is this what you mean, Brittany? Sort of like, and I would love to introduce that to my fellow classmates at school X. Or
yeah, I mean, I even think you can do, like, I call it like the quick shot example, which is just, from doing this to this to this. So at least you're kind of, giving them those little tidbits of information. You might not get to go into detail about all of them. That's one way to do it, but some people might use 10 seconds to explain one example. So I think, just depending on the context, that both ways of showing can work.
And I would add that just from what would you bring to the class and community at our program, a lot of people are going to talk about academic prowess. My suggestion is that you don't always talk about academic prowess. We understand if you're a great quant person, that's wonderful. And maybe that makes its way into your essay. But this is a chance for you to really show who you are as an individual and what excites you and what lights up your face, when you're talking about it. Who knows, maybe it's running regressions. I don't know. But I think that, this is, to me, having reviewed so many of these videos, this is definitely the place where you want that personality, that personal touch to shine. The next question is a hard one because it's really asking you to think about where you might, not be perfect, quote unquote, and you want some support. And this is always a balance because you're trying to figure out how to show your hand. Like, I want to learn about this and the program's going to help me, but you also, need to do it with confidence. Brittany, do you want to talk? I think if both of you could talk about this one, that would be great. So Britt, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so I think that, like you said, going off what you said about balance, it's great to really show your value add and all the positives and the things that you're going to bring to the table, whether it's, academic extracurriculars, your whole you. But it's also really important, and again, aiding in sort of believability and authenticity, to show your weaknesses and show that you are self-aware, and even being a little bit vulnerable. It's also just on a very basic level, you need to understand why you need an MBA. And that means there's things you don't know ultimately. And you need to be able to own the things that you don't know. And there's something really, really refreshing about that. My biggest piece of advice for questions that are where you're expected to talk about or walk through constructive feedback or criticism is to not couch your weaknesses in strengths. I think the worst offender is, I work too hard, I work too much.
Right.
No, that's just doesn't, you need to really find an area, and it can be something very, very, very small. You don't need to have this big fatal flaw, right? You probably don't want to have that for this process, but you need to really, target something that is an area of improvement for you, own it, and be able to even, if possible, explain how the program is going to help you work on it.
Sharon, you're nodding. I have the feeling you agree with this approach.
No, and I was just working with a client last week thinking about something, relatively similar question that he was grappling with. And he had a great story about really feeling like he failed at something at work. There was a very contentious situation, and he felt that he was just very poorly equipped to try and bring these two groups to some sort of peaceful mediation. And so I was like, that's a great story, though, although he was still kind of bummed out with the outcome. But again, that's a growth area. And then just to kind of echo with what Brittany just said, though, mapping it, though, to something specific that he could utilize or leverage while he's enrolled in that particular school. Right. So maybe, a negotiations class or leadership communications or something like that. So I agree with Brittany, though, 110% in terms of, saying things like I'm a perfectionist and it's hard to say no and things like that just does not win you any points. It's total fluff. But really coming in and I think talking about something that you grappled with, I think is really important. I think sometimes too, when thinking about what schools offer, think about some of kind of the hard skills that you need to improve upon. If you've never had a background in finance, talk about some of those pieces. But I think also, a lot of this is around leadership development. So I think if you show kind of leadership vulnerability, that you recognize there are some other interpersonal things that you want to work on, I think that goes really far with admissions committee because there's that authenticity that we're always looking for.
And they also want to know that they can teach you. I think that a lot of people feel when they approach this process that there can be no weakness. And the truth is, if you were 100% good at this stuff, you probably wouldn't need an MBA, right? So I think that I love this question, how will our program help you develop? Because essentially it's asking you to be reflective about like, well, how can we lift you up? How can we help you?
Exactly.
With this.
Exactly.
So Abhijit, we're going to go to the next question. And these are certain schools ask very specific kind of tell us about a time, describe an instance. very reflective pieces. Sharon, do you want to jump in on this one? Describe an instance when you worked on a team with different working styles and perspectives and how you dealt with it. What would a setup for this question be?
I think a good setup would be, again, really bringing a true life example of something that has happened in your workplace. Again, you have to be really concise and succinct. More than likely, you've already had a conversation with your coach about kind of these different circumstances, because a lot of that has helped inform some of your writing for the MBA programs. I think, though, too, a lot of what's happening here is also the nuanced understanding of what is behind this question, which is that MBA programs are attracting students in incoming classes who are coming in with all sorts of backgrounds. And so coming up with something that, again, is very authentic, but talking about how have you had to maybe adapt sometimes your style, or how do you know when it is the right time to advocate for something maybe a little bit more strongly. So again, in terms of approaching this question, I think thinking of a situation, thinking about, what was the strength that you brought in terms of trying to bring a team together. And then I think also, the other piece of this, though, is getting to the whole thing about being open to different perspectives,
right?
And showing how were you remaining respectful, even if there were conflicting ideas and thoughts within that team.
Right. This question is not about how did you get everybody else to agree with you. It's which I think is sometimes a little tricky, but it's how did you lean into this conversation? It sounds more like that kind of bridging the divide between the two.
And I think that also just being comfortable sometimes in conflict, and figuring out ways to manage through conflict in a way that you're still true to yourself, but there's also still integrity and respectfulness within the team, and being able to demonstrate that. And so again, thinking of a good example where you can discuss that, because it will then just make it more real to the person who's going to be reviewing your video response.
Right. And again, at the end of the day, this is your opportunity to really come across as a real person. And so vulnerabilities and all, I think that's so important. In addition to, if you remember last week's conversation, making sure you have excellent lighting and an uncluttered background. Note my gray wall. But I definitely, being really true to yourself is so important. We're going to go on to the next question. Wanted to remind you, everyone who's watching, we are live. Would love to hear your questions and comments. So feel free to put them in the comment box. Brittany, we're going to go back to you. And can you walk us through, tell us about a time when you were out of your comfort zone and how did that make you feel?
I was trying to think of if I had an example that I could give for myself, but I don't have a really good one off the top of my head. But yeah, these are all behavioral questions, at their core. And so, when you're asked a question like this, they're really getting at how did you work through a situation that you had to work through, right? That was a challenge. And I think that kind of, piggybacking on what Sharon said, if you're not, MBA programs are a challenge. It's a challenge to apply. There's lots of things that you have to go through, but these programs should be challenging themselves, because if you're not challenging yourself, you're not learning and you're not growing. And that's the point of, going back to school. And so when they ask you a question like this, they're really trying to get the sense of, first, do you put yourself in challenging situations? Do you put yourself in situations where you're outside of your comfort zone, or are you always just, sitting back and, taking the easy path? I have actually worked with a lot of clients who don't have a good example for this question, or it really takes them some time to kind of think back and reframe a situation, to be able to say, I really was outside of my comfort zone. When I work with people on, applicants, when they're trying to, plan to answer these types of questions, I think it's really important to, again, you have to be very clear, you have to be very concise, and not get too bogged down in explaining the context and the results, and really focus on the action, which kind of, you can go through these with like that STAR method. Like a lot of people work through behavioral questions that way. I think of the CAR method too, which is because sometimes I can't think through 4 things. I can only, I need to just think of 3, especially when you're nervous, right?
Right.
So a lot of people are nervous, in this situation. So I think of the quick context, heavy focus on your action, your behavior. What did you do? And then you can touch on the results. So yeah, these are tricky and really worth taking a lot of time to sit down, plan them out, and think back through. Pull out your resume, go through your resume, go line by line, and think of when if I could be asked a question about this, what would it be? Where did I struggle? What did I have to go through? What did I overcome? What was the challenge? And it's a really good way to prepare.
And it's well worth this preparation, really, because you're going to be asked these kinds of questions, these behavioral questions, in so many different kinds of contexts.
Yeah.
So, the story behind prepping for this stuff is that you never want it to be coming out of your mouth for the first time when you're in an interview situation. I mean, the same goes for us. I haven't been interviewed on any of these questions for probably 10 years, but I probably, would be really good for me to brush up on them because I've got examples. I just haven't organized them yet. And again, Brittany, thank you for that. Going through your resume and remembering that what you put on your resume was not necessarily smooth sailing the whole way through is really, really important, to consider. And Sharon, would you probably give the same advice for the most difficult challenge question about how to approach it?
100%. And again, just it's okay to be raw. I mean, I think that's what
Okay.
schools want to see, and also
Yes.
that you're reflective, that you're not defensive about anything. And with this, I was thinking in particular, a few clients who I've been working with. One person, their challenge would be that they have been in a pretty hostile workplace in terms of some initiatives around diversity, equity, and inclusivity. And so writing about that and trying to manage that situation in a really respectful manner. But it can run the gamut as well. I mean, I think I have another client who would address this, talking about being really disappointed that they didn't make the varsity level golf team after playing for so many years, and really thinking that they would be a shoo-in. And so processing that and learning from that experience. And so I think, again, the big takeaway and the nuanced piece is like, what did you learn from that? And how do you apply those life lessons moving forward? How did that make you a stronger person? And how did that show your resiliency in the face of obstacles?
So again, behavioral questions, wonderful advice from you both this morning on this set in particular, because these, I struggle with these a lot as well, and how to kind of help people prepare for them. So this is great. And I hope that for our viewers currently and those that will look back on this, that they'll really, pay a lot of attention to those behavioral questions and how we suggest you prepare for them. Abhijit, we're going to go on to the next slide and see if there are any questions that folks have based on what we've been talking about this morning. There might not be. I have this feeling that a lot of people are still in the throes of writing their application and haven't quite gotten to this whole video piece quite yet. Excuse me. But we are more than happy to meet with you, to speak with you about your candidacy. We do work with people last minute in the last couple of weeks. Less than 2 weeks until some of the big schools are coming up. We do work hourly, of course, and then also happy to talk with you about round 2. Again, just such a delight to be with my colleagues, Dr. Brittany Michal and Dr. Sharon Joyce this morning. Our partnership with the GMAT Club has been a long one, a very important one for us, and we're really grateful for the time that we have together. So without any questions that I see coming up, we look forward to hearing from you. Again, I think Abhijit is going to put up the next slide, which might have a little bit more information about how to reach us. Set up a 30-minute strategy session with our experts. I am one of them. I'm happy to talk to you, Judith Silverman Hodara, or you can listen to more expert admissions advice on the YouTube channel. And again, for those of you watching YouTube or on Facebook right now, you can schedule those free consultations with us right now. www or http fortunaadmissions.com. Thank you so much, everybody, for being with us, and we look forward to being in touch. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you.